For years, I've started my undergraduate music history survey with the following little activity. I asked the question many of us ask our students: what was music like in the past, and how do we know that? How well does the following performance try to replicate that music of the past? So I showed them the following two video clips, asking them to write down all the things they see that help them determine if this is an accurate representation of the music vocabularies and performance practices of music in the period that we're studying. And we generally start with Paleolithic or Stone Age music, roughly 50 to 12,000 years ago.
The Flintstones, they're the modern Sonic family. From the town of Bedrock, they're a page right out of his story. Let's ride with the family down the street, through the courtesy of Fred and Pete. When you're with the Flintstones, have a yabba-dabba-doo time, a dabba-doo time, we'll have a gay old time.
So students quickly point out that there's little or no evidence for things like cars or mailboxes from this period. The musical instruments they identify hearing were not invented yet. Neither was that awesome American big band sound from the mid-century. A few were nonetheless confused by ancient technologies like, drive-ins or phones with cords, but that's really kind of besides the point. I then show the following clip from Werner Herzog's 2011 documentary, The Cave of Forgotten Dreams, that takes viewers through the visual art and culture of the humans who spent time in the caves of Chauvet roughly 30,000 years ago. I asked them to consider those same questions about authenticity and the music of the past.
One of the most important finds we made in this cave was a very tiny flute made out of the radius of a vulture. Astonishing on this flute is that it is pentatonic. And this is the same tonality we are used to hear today. And if you like, I'll try to play some small tunes for you. And when I first reconstructed the instrument and tried to play some tunes, I came across these ones. Sounds a little bit like Star Spangled Banner.
These two performances, albeit really different, represent just two of the ways I've been looking at extreme early music, a term adopted by some performers and practitioners to describe the reconstruction, creation, and/or performance of music from before the emergence of the first musical notations to disseminate Christian liturgical music in Western Europe at the end of the first millennium. Recent monographs by Gary Tomlinson and Ian Morley on the prehistories of musical behavior in early humans have challenged musicology to think beyond our discipline's familiar chronologies. While these studies expand our knowledge of the earliest human musical resources and aptitudes, neither claim to discover or reconstruct prehistoric music. They may offer insight on how musical tools may have been used and how music may function within early social groups, but they offer no music. However, that has not deterred musicians and scholars from creating new compositions based upon scientific knowledge of early human musical culture from the Upper Paleolithic period. This paper explores these musical imaginations of prehistory to understand how modern musicians, researchers, and filmmakers create new music using experimental archaeological methods and historically informed performance practices. I investigate the sources and methods that scholars, musicians, and engaged amateurs use to imagine and recreate sounds from the earliest musical cultures, drawing on material and experimental studies conducted in prehistoric European caves. After briefly outlining the sources and methods used by anthropologists and archaeologists to understand Upper Paleolithic musical cultures, mostly bone flutes, I turn to two sonic examples. Ernst Reisecke's music for Werner Herzog's documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams, exploring the art and culture of the people who lived in those Chauvet caves, and Anna Friederike Potengowski's 2017 album of new music for replica bone flutes based on years of experimentation. These musical projects constitute an imagined early music repertoire, influenced as much by archaeological evidence as contemporary expectations of performance. So first, what is extreme early music, and how does it differ from regular early music? Scholarship concerning the performance of early music, regular early music, and the historically informed performance movement are usually limited to notated European musical traditions ranging from that 1,000-year period from 800 to 1800 CE, with the most activity concerning music from that sweet spot 250-year period of 1500 to 1750. Our narratives in music history and historical performance practice often just kind of skim over the earliest traces of human music making from prehistory to the introduction of Christian chant notation, because we've always assumed that we just didn't have enough material to properly reconstruct the music of the earliest human civilizations. That assumption is predicated on the idea that in order to properly or authentically reconstruct ancient music, we need to rely on ancient sources alone. A number of scholars and performer scholars are seeking to rectify this gap, reimagining and performing music based upon ancient sources, combined with novel and modern performance techniques and styles. I like to compare this to that 1993 classic film, Jurassic Park, where scientists brought dinosaurs back to life by filling in the gaps of the recovered ancient dinosaur DNA with modern frog DNA. What's the worst that can happen, right? My new project, Extreme Early Music, Performing Antiquity Today, examines the development of such new methods and paradigms of authenticity in the creative work of the scholar performers, and asks, what is the worst that can happen? There are commonalities in approach to extreme early music across a network of performing communities that reimagine the music of a variety of ancient cultures, ranging from Stone Age cave dwellers to the music of ancient Greek dramas, ancient Babylonian epic traditions, and pre-Christian Northern European musics. The methods and models of these practitioners, however, are not only useful for reimagining and performing ancient music, but also for reassessing our understanding of historically informed performance, the evolving understandings of what Western civilization means, concepts of authenticity, and early music more generally. When these musicians draw from both ancient and contemporary, Western and non-Western sources, issues of authenticity inevitably raise questions of cultural appropriation and of race, culture, nationalism, ethnicity in the ancient and modern worlds. What's the worst that can happen? The most extreme of extreme early music concern the musical performances of prehistoric musical cultures. Obviously, no decipherable music notation exists. There are no remaining cultures who preserved their musical culture from 40,000 years ago either. We do have remnants of tools that seem to be used for musical activity. And these include pipes, remnants of which we have discovered in European caves, and the earliest have been dated to 40,000 years ago. But also phalangeal whistles made from mammalian toe bones, free aerophones like bull roars made of antler and stone, and also some more suspect evidence of rasps and other idiophones, as well as possible evidence of caves and rocks themselves being used as lithophones. And I'll just briefly note that Dr. Jean-Luc Ringot has gotten lithophones to trend on both Reddit and Twitter within the past year, which is a whole other topic. The oldest and most intact archaeological evidence of pipes found at the Geisenkloster at Hohefels, as well as the Easterite sites, is fragmentary. However, archaeologists, as well as hobbyists, have reconstructed replicas seen here. The Hohefels wind instrument known as HF1, made from a vulture's radius bone, remains the most complete find to date. Discovered just in 2008, it is currently the only example to be found in situ. It was discovered in the lowest Aurignacian level, 70 centimeters away from the famed Venus of Hohefels, the oldest artistic depiction of the human form known to man. And while Tomlinson and Morley discuss how human musical activity came to this region of the Upper Danube 40,000 years ago, the tools themselves have given archaeologists an opportunity to explore their sonic potential, thanks to a long and fruitful collaboration with musicians like Anna Friederike Potengowski and Francis Gill, who've been co-authoring articles with archaeologists on these artifacts for years. Laboriously reconstructed out of avian wing bones with lithic tools, as seen here. This data is often depicted by archaeologists with the help of their musician collaborators in tables and graphs in archaeological journals. But potential sonic possibilities in academic journals is not music. Potengowski took scientific sonic experiments to the next level in her recent album, The Edge of Time, Paleolithic Bone Flutes from France and Germany, released by the Delphian label and part of a series, as you see here, supported by the European Music Archaeology Project. We'll talk more about them later. Building upon her collaborations, testing the functionality of replicas made by Wilf Hein, that Herzogian eccentric who we saw wearing reindeer hides and playing the Star-Spangled Banner just a few moments ago, Potengowski's album of new music showcases the unique features of these instruments with a modern aesthetic. While archaeologists like Hein focus on the materials and process of constructing the instruments, Potengowski approaches the instruments as a musician accustomed to working in the new music scene. In Potengowski's own exploration of the reproductions, she acknowledges that it is impossible to determine the fundamental and overblown tones of the original artifacts. But on the reconstructions made by Hein and Rangot and others, she notes that there's great opportunity to make use of oral glissandi, overblown air sounds, harmonics, multiphonics, and other extended techniques from the modern flautist's toolkit to expand the range of these very simple ancient instruments. In one of the solo improvisations for the recording on a swan flute from Hohefels cave, we can hear Potengowski's use of the glissandi, and in other examples we hear singing while playing and use of multiphonics. Potengowski's work illustrates how extreme early musicians, like experimental archaeologists, often focus on practice and process. Unlike many early music musicians, they rarely find motivation in rediscovering lost repertoires or performance practices. Extreme early musicians more often come up with new music scenes, come from new music scenes. Few have actual training in historically informed performance. However, while music scholars may quickly recognize this extreme early music as modern, casual listeners and commenters on Twitter and Reddit, YouTube, and other dark corners of the internet may not hear it as new music or reproductions of old tools, but rather just as old music. Similarly, even trained archaeologists often have difficulty distinguishing between modern performance and historical reenactment, a topic I've written about elsewhere. Now, it becomes even harder to distinguish new composition and historical reenactment when the music is part of a documentary film. There are surprising similarities in the experiments of Potengowski and the music Dutch cellist Ernst Reisiger wrote for Herzog's documentary Cave of Forgotten Dreams. The film's music features the composer playing a 5-stringed cello, accompanied by upright and prepared pianos, organs, a chamber choir, and a penny whistle. Following the themes of Herzog's documentary, Reiseker's music draws on a mixture of music vocabularies and sonic worlds to illustrate the narrative of a sophisticated and deeply spiritual ancient culture who inhabited these caves tens of thousands of years ago. The two main musical inspirations appear to be the contemporary classical and improvisatory music scenes Reiseker is part of, as well as the suitably ancient musical sound world that evokes the imagined prehistoric roots of Western European musicals heritage. Throughout the film, we hear Reiseker improvise on his five-string cello over slowly shifting harmonies, sometimes sustained, sometimes arpeggiated, produced by one of the keyboard instruments and or the chamber choir singing on open vowels. Like Potengowski, Reiseker employs extended techniques on his instrument, harmonic glissandi, sul tasto and sul ponticello playing, amplification, distortion through manipulating bow pressure, etc., resulting in effects similar to what Potengowski achieves on the ancient bone flutes. So let's look at an example from the film, from early in the film, and this is where Herzog and his crew make their first descent into the Chauvet cave.
Our guide leads us down a first sloping tunnel, which ends in a vertical drop to the cave floor.
In a 2017 interview, Herzog described those cello harmonics in the film. He said that they had to sound extraterrestrial, something that sounded like fever dream, like something not belonging to our planet. While mostly featuring cello, Reiseker scored one cue late in the film to feature an instrument similar to those ancient pipes found in the cave. Here, the penny whistle player makes use of multiphonics, wide vibrato, glissandi, flutter tonguing, and other modern techniques similar to those of Potengowski over the chorus and cello's accompaniment. In this sequence, we hear the cue as Herzog explores a panel of lions and rhinos deep in the cave. Reiseker's music also evokes ancient musical cultures through musical allusions to the cinematic and operatic soundscapes of Europe's medieval Christian past. It uses music vocabularies strongly identified with canons of Western civilization, surprisingly for a documentary about prehistoric human cultural practices that are tens of thousands of years removed from anything that can remotely be considered a part of modern European history. Herzog's film opens in a Rheingold-esque gesture, images of a barren vineyard leading to the Ardèche River and the entrance to the Chauvet cave. Herzog's voice and a chorus of human voices enter from the depths of the cave, or prehistory, or the river, I guess. The voices resemble the slow unfolding of instruments in Wagner's music drama that depict both the Rhine itself, but also suggest, as Barry Millington has described it, quote, the birth of the world, the act of creation itself, which is a theme Herzog uses throughout the film as well. In an interview with the magazine Archaeology, Herzog extends the Wagnerian connections in his description of the landscape of the caves surrounding themselves, which he describes as like, quote, a purely Wagnerian opera stage. He reiterates this in the film itself, comparing the surrounding landscape of that Pont d'Arc over the Ardèche River as something that could be, quote, straight out of a Wagner opera, the death of Siegmund from Die Walküre. Mythic Wagnerian paths quickly make way for vertical choral writing that nods to the microtonal and cluster chords of Ligeti and Stanley Kubrick's monoliths from 2001: A Space Odyssey. The similarity to this iconic film about the ancient history and mystery of strange rocks can't be merely coincidental either. So let's listen to that cue. The illusions don't end with Kubrick's meditation on technology, human evolution, and human origins, as Herzog ruminates throughout the film on the spiritual significance of these cave paintings, comparing the acoustics of these caves to European cathedrals. Reiseke draws on film music tropes of Christian medievalism that Stephen Meyer has beautifully illustrated in his multiple publications on the soundtracks of post-war Hollywood biblical epics. One of my favorite examples is a piano cue in Herzog's film featuring left-hand tremolos and a simple right-hand melody of even half notes that breaks into a near paraphrase of John Williams' Grail theme from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Both feature that kind of cool medievally, Renaissance-y, Christian-y, Phrygian cadence, cinematic shorthand used in many biblical epics. So let's take a step back here. Aside from the sequence featuring a pretty awesome example of extreme early music by way of Wolf playing a vulture bone flute, the music in Herzog's Cave of Forgotten Dreams uses new music techniques to evoke a prehistoric past, but also music clearly coded as rooted in the traditions of Christian Western Europe to make a sonic link from that prehistory to modern history. These connections are not just heard in film, but are made explicit, actually, on the webpage of that European Music Archaeology Project, the program that funded Anna Friederike's Potengowski's album. And it reads, "Music is the sound evidence of Europe's ancient common roots." Extreme early music reminds us that regardless if it's the Flintstones, experimental archaeological projects, or documentary films about prehistory, the fact that no surviving musical material survives the millennia of history has not slowed scholars and musicians to create these sounds. While we may have massive gaps in our knowledge, those are easily filled with new material, not frog DNA, as well as experimental practices. The archaeological finds of tools of music making from ancient and prehistoric music open new opportunities for critical organology, as well as musicians develop anew ways to play these modern replicas of ancient instruments. Lastly, extreme early music not only offers new paradigms for thinking about historically informed performance of more familiar repertoires, but it tests the limits and boundaries for what can be done. As early music becomes more and more extreme, further removed from the present and the tyranny of musical texts and traditions, practitioners get more and more freedom to reimagine the ancient musical past the ways they want. And in the end, who is to say that our ancestors 40,000 years ago didn't play the Star-Spangled Banner dressed in reindeer hides? Thank you.